allow me to introduce Ms. Bostjanick. She is currently serving as the Office of Undersecretary of Defense Acquisition and Sustainment Director of Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. In this role, she is responsible for managing the initiation of the CMMC program and is responsible for establishing all policies and procedures with regard to the CMMC. Previously, she served as the DIA Head of Contracting Activity, as well as a Senior Contracting Officer for the Missile Defense Agency. Ms. Bostjanick, welcome. Know you're busy, really appreciate you being here.
No problem.
So we will dive right in. You are the main event. We've been stacking questions all along, but we'll start with a little bit of an interview. So we've heard from Katie Stewart and Andy Hoover, Carnegie Mellon, that helped create the model. We heard from the National Archives, who talking about CUI and markings, and then we just heard from Chris Golden at the accreditation body. But with the exception of the National Archives, all those people work for you when it comes to CMMC. So can you give us kind of a status update of this thing and what we can expect in the next 6 months?
Sure. So you guys are probably aware that we're going to have to go through the rulemaking process with OMB. We have currently initiated that process, and hopefully within the next month, you will see it out in the Federal Register for public comment. I encourage everyone to make comments, and I encourage them more to make positive comments, but we encourage everyone to make comments. So we will be spending our summer answering those comments, incorporating them into the rule, and making adjustments based on what we hear. We are also working on a significant amount of tabletop exercises and pilots and pathfinders over the summer to make sure that when this thing goes live, it's ready to roll, that we have honed our expertise, that we've gotten everything laying flat, and that we understand exactly all the perturbations of what we're asking industry and the government side to do. One of the things, you know, you talked to Devin this morning from NARA. And, you know, they are an extremely important part of this because we're definitely working on mapping that controlled unclassified information through the supply chain. You know, one question that people have is, okay, if you say that a program has to be CMMC level 4, does that mean I as a subcontractor have to be CMMC level 4? No, it depends on the level of data that gets flowed to you. So one of the things that's going to be very important is that we understand that data, what level CMMC is attached to that data. And then as we flow that data down, as we disaggregate one portion of data from another, does it need to be at the same level of CUI certification, or can it drop? You know, I'm sure people are getting sick of hearing me tell this story, but Miss Arrington went out to a contractor site when she was at Transcom. It was a guy who was doing welding. And he was like, I'm a welder. I don't need cybersecurity. You know, ma'am, I got my welding capability. I'm good to go. And she said, well, how do you find out what the welds are that they want you to do? And he said, well, I get them right here on my computer. And she said she could see his laptop, his Apple open with his Facebook Messenger in the corner and his Amazon delivery notification on the other side of it. And she noticed an AutoCAD program. And she said, can you zoom out on that program so I can see exactly what you have? He had the structural design for one of our tactical aircraft. Okay, and she was like, well, don't you think our adversaries would like to get a hold of that? He was like, well, maybe, I guess so. And she said, or they'd like to get in and change the tolerances on your welds that they've sent you, so you have substandard capability and then you lose business because your quality becomes questioned, or they can steal all your account information. And we have had contractors who were like, where's my payment? Government says we paid you. Well, somebody got in and stole that information from them and redirected their payment to their account. So there's several ways that you can be hit as a contractor. But with regard to the CUI, that welder had no need for the entire tactical design of that aircraft, structural design of that aircraft. He only needed the welds that he was responsible for. So if I had taken the time as the prime to go in and cut out those individual welds and send him only the data he needed, then he doesn't need to have as high a level of protection as an entire design would require. So if we pay attention to what our tasks our subcontractors are performing for us and what only the data they need to have to perform that task is, then we can ensure that the CMMC level is appropriately aligned to their need and what they're going to be working on. So we're doing pilots over the summer and pathfinders. Now with the pathfinders, what we're going to do is we're asking the services for both the pilots and the pathfinders to nominate programs to participate in these. The pathfinders are going to be existing contracts that we're going to modify, and then we're going to go in and do mock assessments. They'll be not for attribution, there'll be no credit, but they'll give our C3PAOs the opportunity to go in and perform an assessment and actually get practice in doing it before it goes live. It will give the programs an idea of what their vulnerabilities and their cybersecurity landscape looks like. The pilots are going to be very similar in nature, except for it's going to be a new program. And we're going to not require CMMC certification for award, but you will be, as a pilot participant, you will have a requirement to go through a mock assessment, or not a mock assessment, but an assessment, but it won't be for credit and it won't be for attribution. So if you don't meet the CMMC certification level, you won't lose the award, but you'll know what you need to do to get there. And we'll also do some assessments in the supply chain as well to go ahead and roll out and keep practicing our craft and make sure it's perfect by the time it goes live, so we can work through any bumps in the road or anything like that before we get there, because we cannot require it until that rule becomes published. And we expect that to hopefully happen within the next 6 months. But with COVID, with election implications, there are some uncertainties that we're not exactly sure. We're pushing hard. We're doing everything on our part to make it happen. And we just keep our fingers crossed that it's going to happen on time.
So from a timeline and milestone standpoint, it's kind of sounding like the first time somebody will be actually assessed for actual score is the end of this year at the earliest, or beginning of 2021. Is that fair to say?
Probably, yes.
And how will the contracts be selected? So will it be the original Pathfinder contracts that get turned into the actual, first contracts to be assessed, or?
So we're asking the services to identify programs in the first year, because, we said we would roll it out for 10 to 15 programs initially. So we're asking the services to identify RFPs that would hit about the time we anticipate the rule to be published. We're asking them to be equivalent to the CMMC level 3. So it's not going to be at the higher levels yet, right? We're going to start out with the basically the standard CUI type NIST 800-171 requirements in the first year. They'll be at level 3, and probably not huge contracts with tons and tons of subcontractors, but a good number of subcontractors to practice the effort. And then they will identify those programs. And then you will see an RFI that will say, this program is going to have a CMMC requirement. We've just finished our tabletop exercise where we worked through a mock RFI production. So we're solidifying verbiage that we will get out to the contracting officers. Like when you were referring to CMMC in your RFIs, this is kind of language that you want to include. This is how you want to write it up. So we're doing that. And then as that goes, they're not all going to be, every RFP is going to be let in January. So everybody has to be certified, at one time. Those RFPs are going to hit through, over the course of the next year. So you'll see RFIs coming out. You'll see a notification that this is going to have a CMMC requirement with the verbiage. And then you'll get the RFPs, and you'll have the information in the RFP of what you need to meet, how you need to handle it, how you need to characterize your subcontractors through the supply chain and whatnot. And then what our expectation is that, and this goes back to the whole CUI identification and how important that is that the program will identify the controlled unclassified information and the associated level of CMMC. They will go through the statement of work and identify those areas that have a CMMC level 3 or above requirement, right? Or not, to level 1. They'll put it out in the proposal. The offeror will come in. They will give their proposal of what kind of work they anticipate having, who their subs that they anticipate having to flow CUI down to, who their subs that they don't anticipate having to flow CUI to that will just be at the CMMC level 1. They'll do the best value analysis and review of the proposal. Once the contractor is selected and an award happens, there'll be a post-award conference where the contractor and the government sit down and they make sure that everybody is in agreement with that controlled unclassified information, the level that it needs to be, how it's going to be flowed down, and to whom it's going to be flowed to. And there will be validation by the contracting officer on the government that whomever is in that supply chain has the commensurate CMMC level needed to participate.
So it sounds like, so one of the questions that we get all the time is how is this determined, the different levels that are required? If I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like, at least in the Pathfinder program, almost the primes will decide who needs to be a level 3 versus a level 1 based on where CUI is going to flow. Is that?
Well, it's determined with how the CUI is going to flow, right? And that post-award conference where the prime and the government get together and have that agreement and discussion. But, undoubtedly, if I'm a prime and I win this and I decide, each prime is going to decide how they sub out their work differently, right? I might have an expertise in one area, but not another, but another prime is going to stack their stones differently. So based on how they structure their subcontracts and what areas they want to farm out to subcontractors is going to be how that CUI is going to flow. The government is responsible for identifying that CUI and determining the level. We have a Protecting Critical Technologies Task Force. I don't know if you guys have heard about them within the department. And they came up with a methodology for program managers to use to determine what the overarching CMMC level would be associated with their program. So if I have controlled unclassified information that I'm going to need to flow to my contractor in my program, I would use this methodology to determine whether or not that would require a CMMC level 3, 4, or 5. And then from there, they would determine what part of that data, what part of that program rises to the CMMC level 5 or 4, and then what parts would be at a lower level. And then as you draw it down, if I give this information to if I need bolts on my program and I'm buying from a bolt manufacturer, then I'm just buying a bolt to a certain specificity and I don't have to give him any of the rest of the technical documentation that's associated with the higher level CUI, and he could just be a level 1. You see what I'm saying? So that's probably going to be one of the most important and difficult things that we do is mapping that controlled unclassified information. But no matter whether it's CMMC or 7012, it needs to be done because the requirement has to be flowed down.
And so if I'm understanding correctly, the program officer will decide based on this methodology the level that the contract falls into, and then we'll work with the prime after awarding to determine what levels the subs need to be at. Is that?
There will be information provided in the RFP that will give the prime an idea of what they would need to flow down, right? We're going to characterize the data in the RFP. So as a prime, I'm going to get this RFP and I'm going to say, okay, this is associated with CMMC level 3. This part's not. And so then he's going to have to give me in his proposal at least some of the subcontractor capability that they think they're going to have. we're going to have to validate that what their plan is works, and the people that they're planning to work with do have the certification. Then after award, there would be a conference where everybody would make certain, like, because sometimes there's not subcontractor relationships solidified before the contract is awarded, right? So for that portion, they would have a conference and a conversation to make sure that whatever CUI the prime plans to flow is at the right level, and that subcontractor that gets that data is certified at the correct level. So it's going to be a multi-step process.
And is that just for the Pathfinder program, or that's expected to be kind of the way that?
That's the way it's got to go once we put this into practice. But that's part of the reason why we want to have some of these Pathfinders and pilots, is to ensure that, you know, the processes and procedures that we advocate from the OSD level are smooth, and that it's an easy to understand and easy process to follow. Because we understand everybody's busy, nobody has a ton of time. I mean, that's part of the reason why CUI gets flowed down to subcontractors that don't need to, right? Why did that guy have the entire design? It was because somebody didn't have the time or didn't take the time to cut out those specific areas of that design and send those just to him. They said, it's easier to just send him the whole thing, right? Let's stick that package in there and shoot it out. And that's part of the problem. We've got to be aware that we shouldn't be doing that, and that we have to be on top of how we flow that data down.
And one of the biggest questions that we get all the time is, how do I know what level I need to be at and I should be prepping for right now? So you mentioned a methodology. Will something like that or some sort of criterion be released so that especially the small defense contractors can figure out where they think they need to be?
So right now that methodology is classified. So we're going to have to work through that. I think with contractors now, if you handle or are aware that you handle controlled unclassified information, then you know at a minimum you're going to have to be level 3. If you are working on anything that we would consider, you know, data that we don't want our adversaries to have, things that could materially impact our programs if our adversaries got a hold of this data, then you can expect that you're going to be at a level 3 or higher. And then the more impactful the data might suggest a higher level of controlled of CMMC. Does that make sense?
It does, and so the estimates that have been thrown out, some in this conference, some at different kind of venues, are levels 4 and 5, 1 to 5% of the defense industrial base. Level 1, I've heard anywhere from 60 to 80% for level 1. Are those, how accurate are we talking?
So those are in line with what our office anticipates, right? We anticipate that level 1 will be 60% or more of the contractors out there. You know, I think, what do they talk now is clear defense contractors are about 20% of the population of the DIB. And so when you look at that in alignment with these higher critical areas, I think that's where you start gravitating towards in the higher CMMC level. So I think you're pretty spot on where you are.
Okay. And then the question that I've heard you talk about before, but it was very early on, and we got it earlier today, was
my words are coming back to beat me.
It was very early on, so I think it was. I know it was accurate at the time because it's held up, but just wondering now. NIST 800-171, you know, is still a requirement. It's still something that has to self-attest to, and that ties to a level 3 or almost a level 3, you know, minus 20 controls or a plus 20 controls. When will NIST go away and that self-attestation stop being something you need to
do? So we hope that by 2026, everything will have converted to CMMC. Right now in the regulations, there is not a given sunset date for that, but I believe as CMMC comes online and takes over, then certainly that assessment and that methodology will sunset and we'll move forward with CMMC.
And just in the interim, I think one of the questions is, so NIST and these 110 controls, which kind of map to a level 3, but I'm one of the 60, 70, 80% of the DIB that only needs to be at a level 1. This is a contractual obligation that I'm going to get certified on and audited independently, but I'm self-attesting to this over here. How should companies be reconciling the 110 controls they're self-attesting to versus I only need to be a CMMC level 1?
So if you are not dealing with any data that would be considered controlled unclassified, if you're presenting or providing a product or simple services to the government, then you would probably only need to be a level 1. Now, if you look at that 7012 clause that requires you to have a system security plan and a POAM to get there, it perturbates on the fact that you have to, if you are handling controlled unclassified information. And you have to have that in your contract, right? It has to be identified that I've given you controlled unclassified information. In fact, that's one of the complaints that we've heard resoundingly from contractors is like, nobody's ever told me that I've got controlled unclassified information, so I haven't bothered to do anything with regard to the self-assessment and what have you, because I've never felt like I've had to. And that's why we've got a whole training program on our side going on with DAU and whatnot to make sure that we train our workforce on controlled unclassified information. And one of the ladies in R&E that we've spoken to, you know, we have these conversations about controlled unclassified information and that people say they don't understand it. And she's like, well, yes, they do, because they know what distribution statements to put in their contract. And so I have to go back and look, right? I should have looked this up before I got on here. I think if you have a distribution statement B in your contract, then you can anticipate that you have controlled unclassified information. But there are, and don't quote me on B because I don't have that at the top of my memory, but if you look at your distribution statements and the way that it's characterized in there, you can tell if you have controlled unclassified information.
Thank you for that. Okay, kind of moving into the costs realm, which has been one of the biggest pushbacks this whole time. I saw the other day a new bipartisan bill that would authorize the DoD to issue grants to help small manufacturers reach compliance with any cybersecurity standards, but especially CMMC. Do you think this is something we can expect more of? Are there any other similar programs that the small and micro contractors that are on the line should be aware of right now to help them pay for this?
Well, so not so much to pay for it, but we have Project Spectrum to train them and get them ready, right? There's a lot of programs out there and information out there to help you know what you need to do and help you step through the process. The payment part, these grant programs, I think we are going to see more because I think Congress is very interested in ensuring our cybersecurity. You know, if you look at where we are and what has happened, it took 7 years for 7012 to come online because there was a resistance to believe that we were getting hacked, right? There was a resistance to believe that we needed cybersecurity. We were transparent. Nobody needs to hack us, right? And then as time went by, we started seeing more and more hacks and ransomware and phishing attacks and major loss of data. You know, that's why China has a plane that looks very much like our F-35 over there right now, right? Which I get very upset about because I did work for NavAir at the time. And I remember the blood, sweat, and tears that went into designing that aircraft and the hours that the engineers spent when they had a problem, when they couldn't get it off the deck of an aircraft carrier because the wings were too heavy. And why was that? And all these years of effort and blood, sweat, and tears. And that data got stolen like that. And then they have this, and we lost our superiority. So, you know, it's very, we've got to protect ourselves. And I think Congress recognizes it. And I think there will be more of a push to make sure that we protect ourselves and secure our data going forward.
We just talked to Chris Golden about is the CMMC AB tasked with controlling cost at all? And his message is kind of like, well, they can't really control the open market, the contracts between the defense contractors and the C3PAOs. Ultimately, the DoD foots the bill for this whole thing, and I know that there's going to be savings from our adversaries not ending up with the F-35, but from a budgeting standpoint, other than stealing our sensitive data, has there been a lot of talk on kind of what this is going to do to the budget?
There has been some interest. We had, as part of our rulemaking process, we had to put together a cost model and evaluate it. I think at the end of the day, the fact that the cost of this will be spread across all aspects of business because it'll be incorporated in overhead and G&A rates, that it will kind of level set the playing field. Now, the rising tide, right? Because it's gonna raise costs across the board. But for small companies right now, you have some that are attesting that they're doing the things and are compliant when they really aren't. And it's not impacting their indirect rates. And then you've got those others that are doing what's supposed to be done and are in compliance and spending the money to make it happen. And their rates are higher as a result. So CMMC and the fact that we're going to validate that you're doing what you're supposed to have already been doing, and I don't think the extra 20 requirements are going to be that huge of an outlay, right? I think the new cost that's going to have to be burdened by everybody is the cost of the assessment. And why do we have that cost of assessment? Because people didn't do what they were asked to do originally, and we had to be put in a position where we have to validate that it's happening.
And is, as far as the initial push, we also talked to Chris about the supply problem as auditors are getting trained up or as assessors are getting trained up. So how is that pairing process going to work as this thing does start to open up, pairing those who really need to be certified because they're going to go for a contract that has an RFI out, and those that just maybe want to do it for a competitive advantage or be first to market with the certification?
So we are not intending at this point in time to require a prioritization from the standpoint of the accreditation body. Like you have to go do an assessment on Bob first as opposed to Tom because Bob's participating in an RFP. I would imagine if we were in a position like that, there might be some. Well, no, I'm not even going to say that because I think what we're going to do is we're going to hope that there are going to be enough auditors out there that this isn't going to be an issue. And, a lot of people have a lot of consternation about whether or not there are going to be enough auditors. But when you look at the fact that they're going to be training 20 to 30 per month, and I've had a ton of people come to me wanting to sign up to be auditors, to be or assessors, not auditors, but assessors. And I don't think I foresee a problem. If we have a problem, then I'm sure we'll come up with a solution to it. We'll figure our way around it. But at this point in time, I really don't think you're going to be in a position where somebody's going to be clamoring to get certified and they don't have an auditor or an assessor available. I think the problem that you're going to have is you're going to have people waiting until they see an RFI and say, I'm interested in that. Now I want to get certified. And they would have been better stood to get preempted it and gotten out ahead of it.
And so back to the primes for a second. So it seems like they've been heavily involved in getting the word out to the smaller defense contractors, and they've done a great job of that. What is the long-term expectation of them from the DoD, if any? Is any guidance being given to them, or is it up to each prime to kind of assist their supply chain as they see fit?
So we're not telling them how to secure their supply chain, but we are telling them they need to secure their supply chain. And they have been awesome. They've definitely leaned in and worked with us. They've helped us as we have gone through the model releases, given us their honest feedback to make sure that what we come up with is something that is viable and the juice is worth the squeeze, that we're not putting requirements in there that are just laborious and don't make a difference. We definitely got the standards right now that we think make a strong difference. And they have been very open and helpful about giving us ideas about what to do in the future. And they have been awesome about working with their supply chain and saying, hey, this is coming. You guys get ready for this. We need this to happen. So we've been very lucky that they've embraced it. And I have to say, many of the places that I've been and the people I've talked to, I haven't had anybody tell me this isn't something we don't need to do. Everybody recognizes the need for cybersecurity and protecting our data.
Kind of taking the similar logic to the accreditation body. So unlike a FedRAMP where an RFP was put out, right, and the A2LA wins it and they're the accrediting authority for FedRAMP, CMMC is much bigger. This is being built from the ground up, but that body's sole purpose is CMMC accreditation. What sort of oversight of the CMMC AB, both from the DoD and Congress, if any, how are they being evaluated and what does success look like from that standpoint?
So we're in the process of getting everything solidified with them. We intend to have monthly, quarterly meetings with them, and there'll be metrics of, how many people got certified? How many people have you found issues with? There are metrics that we will be looking at to see what, to measure our success.
Okay. This is more of a personal question, but I think it is indicative of some of the questions that we got. I read an article the other day about remote work in CUI, and it suggested that Alexa and Siri and Google Home and other listening devices should be banned in areas where CUI is processed. And that's my Alexa right there, actually, just talking. So even if they're logically separated on a different network, this sounds an awful lot like check your cell phone in before you enter the skiff. How far is this going to go, and how concerned are you or the DoD about the line between classified and controlled?
So I think that, there's a concern that we keep that data protected. And, I think because it's controlled unclassified and it's unclassified in nature, then the parameters aren't going to be nearly as strict as you would if you were dealing with secret data. And I think hopefully by the rules and the regulations and the instructions that we give, people will be witting and aware enough that I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to sit here and read out loud my statement of work so my Alexa can record it all and have a oops where they send it off. I mean, hopefully the people who are in receipt and dealing with this data will be aware of their surroundings and what's going on. Not sure that I could see the federal government ever mandating that you're not allowed to have an Alexa in your house if you're working from home and you're dealing with CUI.
We know that and we're getting some questions in, so I'll try and wrap up here, but we know that the rest of the government, the federal government at least, the international community, everybody's watching this very closely with the DoD.
No pressure, right?
Yeah. What is the future of CMMC in your eyes? We've heard this will become a federal standard, state, local, maybe even commercial someday. The idea of cybersecurity audits or assessments becoming a part of the American business fabric in the same way that financial audits are.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it will. It's been very interesting from, my little old contracting background and the jobs that I've had previously. This has gotten a lot of traction. It's gotten a lot of attention. We have countries coming to us on a regular basis, interested in CMMC, interested in how we're going to do it. We've already had some that have engaged with the AB in trying to set up their own CMMC capability in their country and in trying to ensure that there's reciprocity between the two. I think the time is right for this. I think 7012 was the precursor. And, like I said before, it took them 7 years to get people to recognize that there was a need for this. But now with people recognizing that, oh, they're getting hacked and my data is getting stolen and my personal information is getting stolen, all of this has become so second nature and commonplace that people are saying, oh, we got to do something. And I think if you go back and look at our standard and our model at this point in time, it's not really over the top onerous for things that it's requiring or requesting you to do. And I laugh all the time because, you know, I tell people, I said, we got to be in our sweet spot, because I got people that are cyber geeks on one side going, it's not strong enough, it's not going to do enough. And then you get the people on the other side that are like, you're killing me here. This is way too much for me to do. So we've got complaints on both sides. We must be right where we need to be. And we got to do it. And I think, you know, the world's watching. I think there are several other federal agencies that are interested, that are watching as well. If I can get through the rulemaking process and get this first year behind me, I think you'll see a lot more people coming on board.
And so what does success ultimately look like for CMMC? How do you measure it?
Oh, that would probably be the number of incidences of exfiltration that we see reducing significantly. You know, that we don't find ourselves in a situation where our weapon systems are being replicated around the world where we don't want them to be.
Kind of final two questions. I asked Chris Golden the same two final questions. This whole thing has moved incredibly fast. With it, there have been communication gaps that at times are filled by industry or media or guesswork, and they're not always entirely accurate. What is one misconception that you see out there the most, or that you're still seeing that maybe frustrates you?
There are an inordinate amount of companies advertising and telling other companies that they can certify them. And we all know that registration for the first class just opened. So if anybody's telling you, pay me so much money, I can get you certified, they're not telling you the truth. And my fear is that there'll be people out there that'll try to take advantage of the system and profit from it, and put companies at risk because they're going to sell them a bill of goods that aren't exactly the sanctioned capabilities that we're looking for, right? So I would pray and ask that everybody go to the CMMC AB website. That's where you want to get your assessors from. That's where you want to get your information from, is from the DoD website and the CMMC website. And don't listen to the snake oil salesman, because, you know, there are a lot of very bright people out there. I know, I'm not saying that some of these companies don't know what they're talking about, but they haven't gone through the process, and a certification from them is not going to count. So don't waste your money.
And then lastly, we do have a lot of, I think about half the registrations for the small and kind of micro defense contractors. Is there anything that you want them to know?
Be aware when the assessment guides come out, and make sure you take a look at them and read through them. If you don't understand what you see, make sure you get in touch with a Project Spectrum. You give our office a call, whatever you need to help you through the process. We'll try to put you in touch with the right people to help you. You know, we've been very fortunate that a lot of the primes have also stepped up and said they would be helpful. They mentor protege type things. So, you know, avail yourselves of the capabilities out there. They shouldn't be too hard. And we are here to help, because we do not want to turn anybody away. We don't want to lose any of our support and our DIB partners, because they're very important to us.
And with that, we will open it up to questions. I think one of the ones that we've had consistently today is reciprocity, and it has all been deferred to you. We heard about ISO 27000.
They put it all on my shoulders. That's not fair.
We did hear, Katie Stewart did provide a little bit of clarification in terms of, she said ISO 27001, FedRAMP, and DIBCAC were the three that she knew of that were at least being looked at. There was a question about ISO 9001, which I think is more of a quality control manufacturing cert. What are the reciprocity standards being looked at? Mm-hmm. When will we know?
So we've got several working groups that are working through the frameworks of each one of these programs. And so DIBCAC is probably the first, or the DoD assessment is the first one that we will complete reciprocity for, because it is very closely aligned to what we're doing. FedRAMP, we're also working on that and looking at the differences. And the one thing with FedRAMP is it still allows POAMs, right? So the one thing that we're going to be looking for is a reciprocity, but because you've got a FedRAMP level 3, IL level 3, if you have a POAM, then you're not going to get credit for the section that you have a POAM for. You must close your POAMs to get the commensurate level. We've also been dealing with the DOE one. Is it C2M2? I think it is. We've been meeting with DOD on a regular basis, DOE on a regular basis, to start working through their certification program to ensure that we have reciprocity with them as well.
One of the things on FedRAMP is it comes up a lot, is that's a authorization for a specific cloud service or system, right, that is eligible to be sold to government agencies, not like an organizational certification that's similar to a ISO 27001. Any idea on how that exactly will work, or we'll just have to kind of wait? Is it you'll get credit for being on a FedRAMP system, but you still have to do the controls elsewhere?
So yeah, there are two parts of it, right? If you store your data in a FedRAMP system, then you get credit for that part if it's secure, but then you also have to connect to that. So you're going to have some of the controls on your own side to make sure you're protected as you reach into that cloud environment.
This one is I think kind of getting at future revisions to the CMMC model and what that process will look like, and the concern that excessively high requirements will just start being pushed down towards level 1. What is the revision process going to entail, and how likely is it that we see major shifts in controls?
So right now, our anticipation is that the model will be reviewed and updated on an annual basis. And every time we do an update, it will have to go out for public comment. I think the basis for the changes are going to be the threats that we see. So right, contracting person, right? So I don't have a huge technical background. And the guys that I work with are telling me, you know, Stacy, this is the stuff you need to have to keep your neighbor out of your Netflix, right? It's the basics. It's just, do you have antivirus software? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Those kinds of things. So if we start to see that our adversaries or hackers are getting in and compromising the data that needs to be held protected, and the standards that we have in place today are no longer sufficient, then there will be an update to make sure that we plug those holes. And you and I both know that, you know, as soon as I figure out a way to stop one attack, some 13-year-old whiz kid's going to figure out a way around it, right? You know, it's that nephew that we need to make sure goes outside to play and stops doing stuff on his computer that's finding out. But as we see those holes present, then we're going to have to get on top of it and put new standards in place, new requirements that will stop it. The whole plan for CMMC, the whole idea behind CMMC, is to establish a culture of security. What we really want to do is not to even have to make you have a standard, but have all of the companies recognize that I'm being attacked and think through those attacks and put security measures in place themselves to protect their companies and the data that they house. You know, because it's not just DoD that's at risk here, it's even the companies. I mean, like I talked about, people's accounting information is getting stolen and they're not getting their payments, right? We need people to start becoming aware of the way they're getting attacked, like phishing attacks. I think everybody's pretty much aware that don't click on that link in that email that's a little bit suspicious. those are the kinds of things we need to heighten awareness, and we want companies to start doing it because they want to, and they need to protect themselves as well as our data.
Okay, we'll keep going rapid fire here.
Sure.
Where will we find the publication of the new rule once it is submitted for public comment?
So it'll be in the Federal Register. It comes, OMB will publish it in the Federal Register, and you're asking for anybody who wants to comment on it. Is why you're
believe
asking.
so.
So it'll be out in the Federal Register, and OMB will publish it. And I do not know what that website is off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, we can circle back and send that out to people. Often companies create joint ventures to go after a single contract. Does the JV with its own DUNS need its own CMMC cert, even if each of the individual members have their own CMMC certs?
So the one thing you have to think about with CMMC, it's follow the data. And it's whichever network the data transits has to have a CMMC certification. So if both companies are working together and they're at the same CMMC level, and they both are housing that data on their network, then they would both, wherever the network is. Right now, they created a network that was standalone for the joint venture alone, and that network has not been assessed for CMMC compliance, then that network would have to get assessed for CMMC compliance. Does that make sense?
It does. So it sounds like maybe is depending on how they're.
It depends on how you set it up. If you set up a new enclave or a new network for your joint venture, then you would have to have that certified.
Okay. If you are a consultant and the only information in your system is your client's DoD contracts, what level of certification do you require?
That would be, and I'm assuming he means contract numbers and as opposed to the statements of work. So if your contract information is solely limited to what is described as FCI, Federal Contract Information, which is the contract number and that kind of cage code, that kind of information, that would be a level 1. If you have any of the statements of work that would have CUI identified in it, then that should be protected at the level 3.
Okay. One of the things that keeps coming up is the idea of, and especially with NIST 800-171, Andy and Katie told us earlier, you follow the data, right? Or Devin did as well. With CMMC, it's a little bit more comprehensive in terms of it brought some of the availability and integrity stuff back into the model. If a company, it seems to be about developing a security program, which we all know in the industry is a best practice. That's a iterative practice, and you're constantly having the cyber inputs into your overall risk management program. But there's a school of thought out there about isolating the data, in a nice cloud type network, and that's only where CUI is stored and processed and people access it, and now that only has to be assessed. So this question is around, is that okay? We asked this to Chris Golden, but if that's the only place where CUI is that the only place that's going to be assessed? What about some of the other things that are in CMMC, like risk management and inputs and threat intelligence?
Well, so if the CUI is only stored in the cloud, then you would have to meet the commensurate level for the cloud, but you still have to connect with the cloud. So your processes and procedures and how you secure that connectivity, right? Because sometimes they can steal information through the transmission of it over those lines. And so your control and your security posture from that perspective would have to be taken care of as well.
And Andy chimed in and let us know that you were correct. C2M2 was the program.
Thank you, Andy.
The next question gets back to kind of independent enforcement. So what independent enforcement requirements will be established by the DoD to keep the program's integrity?
The CMMC program's integrity?
Yeah, and I think they're getting at the companies providing advisory services, certifications, overall, maybe the accreditation body.
Okay, so one of the things that we've got, so the accreditation body is coming up with a comprehensive quality control plan and ethics and standards of conduct, and we have the ability to review those and monitor those, right, with the metrics that we have. We're also requiring them to meet the ISO standard for an accreditation body as well, which also speaks to a lot of those different areas. One of the things that we've also established is if we see that a company that's had an assessment has an exfil, right, which needs to be reported to DC3. And oftentimes there are other entities that find out about the exfil before the company does and helps notify them. But what we will do is we will bring a team into that company after it's been recognized that there was an exfil. We'll bring the assessor back, we'll bring the AB in, and we're going to look at what caused that exfil. Was it that the assessor missed something, or he didn't follow his processes and procedures correctly? Was it that the AB didn't do a good enough quality control on the assessment report and missed something? Did the contractor meet all the standards that day, but then the day after he stopped spending money on it and became negligent in that area, and that's why the exfil happened? Or was it that my standard missed it, right? It was one of those holes that that 13-year-old kid figured out how to get in, and it's something that the standard needs to be updated, and that we will keep an eye on that, and we will have a team that's going to come triage those when we find them to find out why it happened. And that way we'll be able to keep the correct monitor and control for consistency, for quality as we go down the path.
Makes sense. This was touched on a little bit earlier, but the role of DCMA and their audits as it relates to CUI, both right now and in the future.
They're going to be our friends when we go forward, right? So part of the, they are leaning in with us. They are partners in crime because they're going to be part of our first test run of the training from the AB. They're going to participate in it. They're going to be our test dummies. And they're going to go through the training. They're going to help make sure that we hone that training correctly, since they've already been boots on the ground and seen some of the things and have experiences that can come to bear and help us with our training. They're going to perform some of the mock assessments that we're doing with our pathfinders to help bring out that whole process, right? Because they've got some experience in that. And then moving forward, we anticipate that they're going to be the ones. So, you know, the third-party assessment organizations are going to have to handle controlled unclassified information. They're going to have some sensitive data that they're going to see and take in as part of their effort. The DCMA assessment team will assess the assessors to make sure that they have the proper standards in place going forward. They will also be part of the team that will come out if we have any issues, right? If we have an exfil, they're going to be part of our triage team. There's also an expectation that if you know, your certification is good for 3 years, but say your company just won a contract that's very critical or has some sensitivities. DCMA may come in and do a spot check to ensure that everything is still working properly, not to be punitive, not to take away, but just to make sure before the CUI flows that everything is still in good standing. So we've got a lot of work with them. We've got plans for them.
So not going away.
No.
All right.
No. They are an important part of our program.
The next question. So I guess just to follow up, is it fair to say that seems like that's going to be the main independent kind of audit control function for the DoD in this case, not talking about the accreditation body? Yeah,
they're going to be our main go-to from that perspective. I mean, we'll have the program or the CMMC office that will also be overseeing things as well. I don't get off the hook that easily. I can't just put all on DCMA. I'm going to have some work to do too, I think.
The next question is about exclusion. So we saw the first exclusion with straight COTS or commercial off-the-shelf resellers. Have any other exceptions been discussed? Will something such as OTAs be accepted from CMMC? How likely is it that we see other exceptions?
There might be a couple of other exceptions. I don't think OTAs are going to get off the hook, and I don't think grants are going to get off the hook. I think there's going to be a requirement there because they both handle a lot of sensitive data. And it would be silly for us not to include them in the requirement, you know, especially when you think about how much data we lose every year with our universities through grants.